The Beifongs were, depending on who you ask, the richest family in the Earth Kingdom. Enormous house, walled garden, servants who'd been there long enough to have opinions about the furniture. And for the first 12 years of their daughter's life, most of the town of Gowling had no idea she existed. Not hidden in a dramatic way. Nobody locked her in a tower. She was just kept, quietly and expensively, out of view by two people who loved her a great deal and had decided in advance what she was. That's Toph. That's where she starts. Most people file her as the one who arrived complete. The 12-year-old who walks in already the best there's ever been and never has a wobble about it. And that's true, as far as it goes. What it misses is that she was right about nearly everything. For about 60 years, and being right came with a bill, and she paid it without ever once admitting it had arrived. That's tonight. Her feet, her family, the thing she invented in a cage, and the swamp she ended up in. Subscribe if you fancy it. Otherwise, settle in. We'll be a while. The thing I keep snagging on isn't the wealth, it's the concealment. Toph was born in 88 AG, the only child of Lao and Poppy Beifong, in a town called Gowling. She was born blind, and her parents responded to that by making a decision that I think most people would recognise as loving, and that also turns out, on inspection, to be one of the stranger things a family can do to a child. They didn't tell anyone about her, not properly, not in the way you'd expect a rich family to announce an heir. The result was that a household everyone in town knew about contained a person almost nobody in town knew about. Think about the mechanics of that for a second. Not the emotion of it, the logistics. Every visitor to that house had to be managed. Every social occasion had a shape built around an absence. There would have been staff whose job description, quietly, included not mentioning her. That takes sustained effort over years. Nobody drifts into that. You have to keep choosing it every week for a decade. And they weren't doing it out of shame as far as the story ever suggests. They were doing it out of fear. They'd looked at their daughter and concluded she was fragile, and that the world was a set of edges she'd cut herself on. So they removed the world. I have to be honest about something here, because I think the easy read on the Beifongs is wrong, and I don't want to take it. The easy read is that they're villains, cold aristocrats who wouldn't acknowledge their disabled child. That's not what's on screen. What's on screen is two people who are frightened out of their minds and who have arranged their entire lives around someone they love and have never once actually met. That distinction matters. They'd have thrown themselves in front of a cart for her. They just couldn't hear her. They did give her an education of a sort. Proper Earth Kingdom aristocratic manners. The full course. She learned it all. She learned exactly how to hold a cup and exactly which tone of voice you use for someone above you and someone below you. And she learned it so thoroughly that years later, when the group needed to sneak into a royal party in Ba Sing Se, she could switch it on like a light. That's a nice detail, actually. The scruffiest person in the group turns out to be the only one who was raised to do this. The manners never left her. She just declined to use them at length and on purpose, which is a slightly different thing from not having them. And they hired her an earthbending teacher, a man called Yu, which sounds generous until you find out the terms. Lao instructed him to teach her beginner's moves and breathing exercises, nothing else, ever. I find that instruction more revealing than the concealment, honestly. It's such a specific failure of imagination. Lao Beifong didn't say no bending. He said a bit of bending, the safe kind, the kind that will make her feel like she's doing something. He commissioned a performance of a lesson, a daughter-shaped activity, budgeted and scheduled and supervised, that could never accidentally produce a competent person. There's a whole area of philosophy that's spent a long time on this, and being philosophy has produced roughly 400 different vocabularies for it. The one I find most useful is the distinction between freedom as safety and freedom as space. One version of caring about someone's liberty is making sure nothing bad happens to them. The other version is making sure there's somewhere for them to go. Those two things sound related. They are, in practice, frequently at war. Every parent negotiates that war, and most of them do it badly, at least some of the time. And the Beifongs did it about as badly as it's possible to do it while still being sincere. What makes it properly sad rather than just irritating is that they were wrong about the facts. Not wrong about values, wrong about facts. She wasn't fragile. She was, by a fairly wide margin, the most physically capable person in that house, and possibly in that province. The premise of the whole arrangement was false, and it was false for years and nobody checked. Nobody checked because checking would have required asking her, and asking her would have required the possibility of an answer they hadn't already written. Something I like about how the show handles this is that it doesn't give Toph a speech about it. She never sits her parents down and delivers the thesis. What she does instead is get very good at lying, which is what children do when the truth has been made unusable. She spent years running a completely separate life at night and coming home and eating dinner and being small and delicate and asking to be excused. The performance ran both directions. They performed a fragile daughter, she performed being one, and everyone got through the evening. The one time it breaks, and it does break, is when Aang and the others show up and her parents get to hear what she actually is, out loud, in front of company. And the response is the response. They double down. They ground her. They increase the security. Her father's reaction to discovering that his blind daughter is the most gifted earthbender in living memory is to decide she needs more supervision than before. Because now the world knows she exists and the world is dangerous. That's the moment she leaves, and I've always thought the show is quite precise about why. She doesn't leave because she wants adventure. She leaves because she's just watched the ceiling get lower in real time. Every new piece of evidence about her competence produced more restriction. And once you've seen that mechanism work, once you understand that nothing you achieve will ever be counted, you're done. There's no version of staying that isn't shrinking. Fun detail that sits in here and doesn't get mentioned enough. Her name is a joke on two levels. Toph is a play on tough, obviously. That one's free. It's also a play on Toph, which is our word for someone unbearably posh, and I'd love to know at what point that landed with the writers. Because it's exactly right. She is a Toph. She's the poshest person in that group by an enormous margin. She belches at dinner and lies in the dirt and calls it a healthy coating of earth. And every bit of that is a rich kid's rebellion against a specific set of rules she could recite from memory, which complicates the picture people carry of her rather. Toph isn't rough because she came from somewhere rough. Toph is rough because she came from somewhere so smooth that roughness was the only available protest. I don't think she'd frame it that way. I think she'd say she just likes not wearing shoes, but there's a version of Toph that could have existed. A Toph who stayed, who took the deal, married suitably, ran the estate, and was gently, expensively miserable for the rest of her life, while everyone told each other how well the family had done by her. That version is entirely plausible. That version is what her parents were building, brick by brick, with the best intentions available to them. And the only reason it didn't happen is that at some point, when she was very small, she got out of the house and got lost. And the getting lost went considerably better than anyone would have predicted. Picture the cave rather than the escape. A 5-year-old gets out of the house. That part is quick and probably not very cinematic. What comes after is hours of being underground in the dark, which for her is not a meaningful description of anything, and being lost, which is. And the thing that finds her, or that she finds, depending on how you want to tell it, is a family of enormous, burrowing animals who have been living in that hillside for a very long time, and who are, as it happens, also blind. Badger moles. In the world of the show, they aren't just animals that happen to earthbend. They're the original earthbenders. Everything humans do with stone, every stance and form and school and rigid daily discipline is downstream of watching these creatures move. Toph is the third person known to have learned it directly from them, after two people called Oma and Shu, whose story is its own thing and belongs in a different video, and she learns it by copying. That's it. That's the whole method. There's no instruction, obviously, because badger moles don't talk. There's no curriculum, no grading, no encouragement, no correction. There's a small girl in the dark doing what the big animals are doing until it starts working. I want to be careful here, because there's a sentimental version of this scene that I don't think is the good one. The sentimental version is she was rejected by humans and accepted by animals, and the animals saw the real her. It's fine. It's not wrong exactly, but it flattens the actual thing, which is stranger and better. The badger moles didn't accept her. Acceptance requires having considered rejection. The badger moles never considered anything about her eyes at all, because it had genuinely never come up. There was no accommodation being made. There was no allowance. Nobody in that cave was being kind to her. That's the part that matters. Every single interaction Toph had ever had with a person contained, somewhere in it, an adjustment, a softened voice, a hand on the elbow, a sentence rewritten mid-air to remove the word look. All of it well meant, all of it a tiny signal that a correction was in progress. And then she goes underground and meets something that is simply going about its business. And the business happens to be the most sophisticated earthbending on the planet, and nobody adjusts anything for her because nobody has noticed there's anything to adjust for. She isn't being taught despite her blindness. She's being taught by a method that has no opinion about eyes whatsoever. There's a philosophical point sitting under that, and I'll try to make it without going full lecture, because it's late and neither of us needs that. There's a way of thinking about perception that most of us carry around without examining, which goes roughly like this. The world is out there, your senses are windows, and perceiving is a thing that happens to you when the world comes through the window. Light arrives, you see. Sound arrives, you hear. You're basically a very sophisticated receiver, sitting still, having information delivered. There's an alternative view that's been kicking around for a few decades in a fairly serious way, which says that's backwards. Perception isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do. It's an activity. You don't see the far side of a cup because light from it enters your eye. Light from the far side of the cup very much doesn't enter your eye. You perceive the far side of the cup because you know, in your body, what would happen if you moved. Perception on this view is a skill, a kind of ongoing practical negotiation between a body and a world. And the reason it doesn't feel like a skill is that you've been doing it since before you could remember. Toph is that idea, with the volume turned all the way up. She perceives by acting. Every bit of the world she knows about. She knows because she's pushing on it, and it's pushing back. Her sense of the room is not a picture that has been delivered to her. It's a thing she's doing, continuously, with her legs. The part that makes me happy is that this isn't only a cartoon idea. There's a real body of work, going back decades, on what happens when you route information through the wrong sense. People have built devices that turn a camera feed into a grid of little vibrations on someone's back or their tongue, and given them to blind volunteers. And the volunteers do not report feeling tickly patterns on their skin. After enough practice, they report perceiving objects out there in space, not on the body, out in the room. The information changed doors and the mind treated it as a world anyway. And there are blind people who navigate by clicking their tongue and listening to the return well enough to ride bicycles, which sounds like a party trick and is in fact just echolocation, which we've all agreed is completely normal when a bat does it. None of that is Toph. Toph is fiction, and she's fiction with magic in it. But the underlying claim the character rests on isn't magic at all. The claim is that seeing is not a fact about eyes. It's a job, and eyes are one contractor who's very good at it, and the job can be done by other means if you're prepared to be patient and get it wrong for a long time first. Small thing I love. Toph would find all of that unbearable, every word of it. If you tried to explain an active perception to her, she'd tell you to shut up and hit a rock. She has no interest in her own significance as an epistemological case study, which is part of why she works as one. There's another detail from her childhood that doesn't get much airtime, and that I'm going to plant here gently because it comes back much later. The cave wasn't the only place she ran to. She used to sneak off to an earthbending arena as well. There's a swamp far from jailing, and by her own account she only moved there many years later in her old age, long after her childhood. Hold on to that. Don't do anything with it. We'll be back. What she took out of that cave in the end wasn't just a technique, it was a whole disposition, and I'd argue it's the disposition that runs the rest of her life. She learned that the world will tell you the truth if you touch it. She learned that no one needs to explain anything to you if you're willing to stand there long enough. She learned that the people who'd been softening their voices at her had been, in a very literal sense, giving her worse information than a large, indifferent animal. That's an extraordinary lesson to absorb at 5, and it's a correct lesson. And it's also, I think, the beginning of everything that goes wrong for her later. Because if the ground never lies to you, and people always do, then you're going to end up trusting the ground. One more thing about the badger moles that I don't think gets said enough, and it reframes the entire Earth Kingdom if you let it. The founders of earthbending were blind. Not metaphorically. The creatures who invented the art, from whom every human technique descends, do not have functioning eyes, and never did, which means that art itself, the actual thing at its root, was built by and for something that navigates by vibration. It is a non-visual discipline. It always was. That's its native state. And then humans got hold of it, and humans have eyes, and humans did what humans do, which is take a thing built for a body they don't have, and rebuild it around the body they do. Stances you can watch, forms you can be shown, schools with masters at the front demonstrating so you can copy what you see. The Dai Li, the most feared earthbenders in the world, run a rigid, drilled, visually taught system with hand gestures and stone gloves. And they are extremely good, and they are also, if you follow this through, doing a translation. Everybody else in that world is earthbending in a second language. Toph learned it in the original. That's why her style is so strange to fight. It isn't strange because she's blind. It's strange because it hasn't been through the human filter. She never learned the stances people teach because nobody taught her. She learned the thing the stances are an approximation of. Her whole style is rooted in what earthbending actually is rather than in what it looks like when a person does it. And the result is that fighting her is like arguing with someone who's read the original manuscript while you've been working off a summary. And the joke, the enormous, load-bearing joke that the show never bothers to point at, is that the entire Earth Kingdom spent thousands of years believing that a blind girl was learning their art at a disadvantage. She was the only one of them who wasn't. There were 2 before her, by the way, Oma and Shu, the first humans ever taught by badger moles, in a story about a war, and 2 people from opposite sides who met in secret and learned to move stone so they could keep meeting. That's a properly good story, and it deserves its own night. The relevant bit here is just the shape of the list. 3 people, across the entire recorded history of the world, learned this straight from the source. 2 of them did it for love, and the third did it because she got out of the house and got lost. She goes home after that, incidentally. That's the part nobody dwells on. She learns to see, in the dark, from monsters, and then she walks back into the house and says nothing about it for 7 years. Her feet are filthy. Permanently, non-negotiably. She calls it a healthy coating of earth, which is the single best piece of self-justification in the entire show, and she is not budging on it. They're also the most important body part in the franchise, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to properly notice that. The way it works is this: everything that touches the ground makes the ground move. Not much. But a footstep is a small earthquake, and a heartbeat is a smaller one. And an ant, apparently, is smaller still, and all of it travels through stone as vibration. Toph bends the earth as a way of reading those vibrations. Not passively. She's pushing, constantly, and reading what comes back. And out of that, she assembles a working model of the room, where people are, how far away, how big, how they're standing, whether they've shifted their weight, which they're about to do because you always shift your weight before you throw a punch. So in a fight, she's borderline unfair. She doesn't react to attacks. She reacts to the decision to attack, which happens in your legs a half second before it happens anywhere else. Every earthbender she meets is playing a game where she can see the cards. But I want to spend equal time on what it can't do because the show is unusually disciplined about this, and most people remember the power and forget the shape of it. She cannot sense anything that isn't touching the ground. Somebody in the air is, to her, simply gone. Not blurry, gone. Aang beats her in their first fight essentially by refusing to land, which is funny, and also a complete statement of her limits, delivered as a joke in the first 5 minutes of her existence. Sand is bad. She describes the vibrations in sand as fuzzy, which is a lovely word choice, because it's exactly the word a sighted person would use for a smudged photograph, and she has presumably never encountered a smudged photograph in her life. She can compress sand into rock to get a bit of footing, but she can't aim properly on it. Ice worse, water hopeless, she can't swim at all. Flying she hates, understandably, since being on a bison means being nowhere. Submarines made her ill, and I don't think that was seasickness. I think that was the specific nausea of being suspended in nothing. She can't perceive faces. That's the one that stops me every time. She knows exactly how tall you are, and exactly how you're standing, and exactly whether you're nervous. She has no idea what you look like. She spent years with these people, and could pick out their footsteps from a mile off, and could not have described one of their faces if her life depended on it. And she can't read, at all. Not a workaround, not a slower method, just nothing. There's a running joke about it that the writers keep dropping in. She slaps up a poster and gets it upside down and says, "It's upside down, isn't it?" in the tone of someone who's done this before. She compliments Sokka's drawings, elaborately, with a completely straight face. Put those together and you get something more interesting than a superpower. You get a person with a genuinely different world, not a smaller one, a different shaped one. There are whole regions of ordinary human experience she has no access to, and there are whole regions she has that nobody else does. And the second lot are not compensation for the first lot. They're just what she's got. I think that's why the character has held up as well as she has. She's not written as an inspirational overcoming. Nothing gets overcome. Blindness isn't a problem she solves in episode 6 and then we move on. It's just the architecture of how she meets the world, permanently, with advantages and dead spots, same as anyone's architecture. Now, the design story, because it's genuinely one of the best behind-the-scenes stories in animation, and it makes what I just said funnier. Toph was not originally Toph. In the early planning, the earthbending teacher was a 16-year-old boy. Muscular, jockish, loud, a bit of a meathead, designed as a foil for Sokka's nerdiness. That version got far enough into production to actually exist on screen. There's a shadowed earthbender in the opening of the unaired pilot who is, per the creators, the prototype. Then during season 2, the head writer, Aaron Ehash, pitched a different idea. What if it's a tiny girl? What if the person who walks into a warehouse full of enormous men and dismantles all of them is 12 and about 4 feet tall? Konietzko didn't like it, said so. Pushed back, apparently, for a while, and then after enough conversations came round, and she went on to become one of his favourite characters in the whole thing, which is a very human arc for a person to have about a decision. Nickelodeon weren't keen either, which surprised the showrunners, and I'd love to have been in that room. So the character everyone points to as the definitive Toph, the one you cannot imagine any other way, was a fight. Somebody had to win an argument to make her exist. And then there's the martial art, which is my favourite detail in this entire section, and possibly this entire script. Her fighting style is Chugar, Southern Praying Mantis. That's a real style, a real lineage, and the production learned it from a real teacher, Sifu Manuel Rodriguez, because they wanted Toph to move in a way nobody else in the show moved, rooted, low, close range, everything happening in a very small space directly in front of you. Arms doing quick, sensitive work, while the legs simply do not move. They picked it because it looked right. And then somebody found out that Southern Praying Mantis is traditionally said to have been developed by a blind woman. Nobody planned that. They chose the style for its shape, and the history came free. I don't want to make more of it than it is. Martial arts origin stories are often more legend than record, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but there's something about the way that fact arrived after the decision, unrequested, confirming a thing they'd already got right by instinct. That feels like the show in miniature. Avatar is full of stuff like that. People made a good call for aesthetic reasons, and the meaning turned up later and moved in. The reason all of this sits together in one section rather than three is that they're the same observation from different angles. The feat, the limits, the argument in the writer's room, the style built by someone who couldn't see, every one of them is about the fact that Toph is not a sighted character with a disability bolted on. She's constructed from the ground up around a different way of being in a room. She lies down on bare rock and sleeps like that. No bedroll, perfectly comfortable, because the ground is the medium she's in contact with. And being in contact with it is restful. She's extremely reluctant to let anyone touch her feet, which everyone reads as a quirk, and which is obviously not a quirk at all. It's the same reason you'd flinch if someone put their hands over your eyes. There's a version of this character who is a blind girl with rock powers. That version would have been fine. Forgettable, but fine. Instead, somebody went to the trouble of asking what the world is actually like for her, and then built the entire character out of the answer, including the parts that make her worse at things. The noise is the first thing. An underground arena somewhere in jailing, a crowd that has paid money, an announcer working himself into a state, enormous men with stage names, the boulder, the big bad hippo, the gecko, throwing each other into walls for the entertainment of people who have come out specifically to watch it, which is a thing humans have organised in every society that's ever had a spare evening. And the reigning champion, more than once over, is a 12-year-old girl in a fighting costume who wins most of her bouts in under 10 seconds. The Blind Bandit, her ring name, which she chose, and which tells you a lot because there was an option available where she just didn't mention it. Here's the structure of her life at this point, which is honestly one of the funnier things the show ever did with a character. By day, she is a delicate, sheltered, softly spoken young lady of a noble house who is having supervised beginner lessons from Master Yu and struggling gamely with the basics. By night, she is a professional fighter who has beaten every man in the region and who is, at this point, some distance beyond Master. She goes to the tournament, wins it, comes home, wipes her feet, and lets her father explain to a guest that his daughter is doing ever so well with her breathing exercises. That's a double life a spy would be proud of. Run by a child, sustained for years. And the funniest part is that it isn't really about money or glory. She doesn't need the money. She's from the richest family in town. She could buy the arena. She's not doing it for the crowd exactly. She's doing it because it's the only place in her entire life where the results are real. That's what an arena is when you strip it back. It's a room with no diplomacy in it. Nobody in that warehouse is going to soften anything for her. Nobody's rewriting a sentence mid-air. There's a man, he's coming at her, and either she puts him through a wall or she doesn't. and the answer arrives immediately and cannot be spun by anybody's parents. She's not addicted to violence, she's addicted to honest feedback, and she found the one place in jailing that sold it. But there's a second thing going on, and it's the bit I want to actually chew on, because I think it's less flattering than fans usually allow. The Blind Bandit is a performance built entirely on being underestimated. That's the act. She walks out, small and slight and clearly blind, and a warehouse full of grown men decides in advance that this is a novelty, and then she takes the whole room apart in front of an audience while the announcer loses his mind. The pleasure isn't beating them. She could beat them any old how. The pleasure is the gap. The pleasure is the exact size of the distance between what they thought and what happened. And I understand it. I'd probably do it too. When you've spent your entire life being underestimated in a house where the underestimation has consequences and no exit, then finding a room where you can turn underestimation into a weapon must feel like the best trade anyone's ever offered you. You take the thing that's been used against you, and you monetize it, and the crowd cheers. But it's still a trap, and I think it's a trap in a way she never quite gets out of. Because if your best moment depends on people getting you wrong first, then you need them to keep getting you wrong. You've made an arrangement with the thing you hate. Every performance requires an audience of people who don't take you seriously. And there's no version of that where you're ever actually seen. You've just changed who's holding the misunderstanding, and when it gets corrected, she spends her childhood in a house that refuses to know what she is, and her escape from it is a stage where a crowd refuses to know what she is for, about 8 seconds at a time, and then finds out, loudly, to music. That's not freedom. That's the same room with better lighting. I don't say that to be hard on a child. It's an extremely good coping mechanism, all things considered. It's just not a way out. And I think part of what actually happens when Aang turns up is that she's offered, for the first time, a version of life where she doesn't get to do the reveal, where people simply know from day one that she's the most dangerous person present and treat her accordingly and get on with dinner, which is duller and better. Speaking of Aang, he beats her. First fight in front of the crowd, championship on the line, and he beats her by not touching the ground, and then blasting her out of the ring with a gust of air, which he doesn't even do on purpose. He's just panicking. The champion of jailing gets deleted by an accident. It's played for comedy, and it is comedy. It's also a full honest statement of exactly where her blind spot is, delivered in the first minutes of her existence as a character, and the show never walks it back or gives her a fix for it. She just has that hole in her forever, and she has to build a life around it, like everyone else does around their holes. Now, the tie-off on the whole business, which arrives about 2 seasons later and is one of my favourite jokes in television. Late in the run, the group goes to see a play about themselves. A comically bad, gossipy, wildly inaccurate stage production based on their adventures. Everyone gets savaged by it. Katara is portrayed as a weeping moralist. Sokka is portrayed as an idiot who makes jokes. Aang is portrayed by a woman, which he takes badly. Toph is portrayed by an enormous, muscular, roaring man. And Toph loves it. She thinks it's brilliant. She thinks the actor absolutely nailed it, and she says so, delighted, while everyone else sulks. Which is funny on its own terms. It becomes considerably funnier when you know that a huge, muscular man is literally what she was originally going to be, drawn and shadowed and everything, before somebody won an argument. The joke reaches backwards out of the show and hits the production history. And I have no idea whether the writers were thinking about that when they wrote it. It's exactly the kind of thing they do on purpose, and exactly the kind of thing that would land by accident. With Avatar, you genuinely can't tell, but there's a serious note underneath the gag, and it's the reason I think that scene belongs in this section, rather than as a piece of trivia. Everyone else in that theatre is upset because the play got them wrong. Toph isn't, And it isn't because the play got her right. The play got her wildly, absurdly wrong. She's thrilled anyway, because being turned into a bellowing 8-foot man is a misunderstanding that flatters her. And she has, by this point in her life, an extremely sophisticated relationship with being misunderstood. She's been misunderstood in the direction of fragile her whole childhood, and she found she could survive that by leaning into a misunderstanding in the other direction. And here's a stage version of her doing exactly that, professionally, in front of hundreds of people, for money. No notes. Honestly, no notes. She's watching her own coping mechanism performed by a specialist, and she's having the time of her life. Here's the argument, and then we'll get to the boulder. There are two kinds of knowing, and they don't work the same way. There's knowing that something is the case, the capital of the Earth Kingdom is Ba Sing Se, water is wet, that sort of thing. Facts, statements, things you can be told, and once you've been told them, you have them. And there's knowing how to do something. Riding a bike, catching a ball, reading a room. And the thing about that second kind is that it is not made of statements, and no quantity of statements will produce it. You can read every word ever written about balance and you will still fall off the bike. Nobody has ever been talked into being able to swim. The difference isn't that the second kind is harder to explain. It's that it isn't the sort of thing explanation does. There's a lovely line about this, that we know more than we can tell, and it's true of practically everything worth being able to do. You recognise a friend's face in a crowd instantly, and you could not begin to describe the procedure. The knowledge is real, complete, immediately available, and permanently unsayable. Toph is a walking barefoot argument for that view, and it makes her a bad teacher in one very specific way, and a great one in another. The bad way first, because it's funnier. Aang needs to learn earthbending. Toph is the teacher, and her method, in its entirety, is: here is a rock, move it, not like that, do it again, no, again. She has no vocabulary, she's not withholding one, she hasn't got one. She learned this art from animals in a cave by copying them, and nobody has ever articulated a single principle of it to her in her life. So when Aang stands there wanting a framework, she genuinely has nothing to hand him. What she has is the thing itself, in her body, complete and inaccessible. She can do it perfectly, and she cannot say it at all. The gap between them is not skill. She has all the skill. The gap is that Aang has spent his whole life learning things from monks who explain, and she's spent hers learning things from a hillside that doesn't. And she's not gentle about it. She's the opposite of gentle. She mocks him. She calls him Twinkle Toes. She stands there while he fails repeatedly and offers nothing except the information that he's failed. Katara's whole approach with him is encouragement, patience, scaffolding, the works. Katara is a genuinely superb teacher. And Toph looks at all of that and provides the exact opposite. In a strict sense, that's appalling pedagogy. If a teacher did that to your child, you'd be in the school by Tuesday. Except that earthbending is not waterbending. And this is the thing the episode is actually about. And it's the reason Toph turns out to be right, in a way that annoys me slightly. Aang can't earthbend because Aang's entire instinct is to avoid. That's what airbending is. Something comes at you, you're not there. It's the most beautiful conflict avoidance system anyone's ever devised. And it's not a technique for him, it's a personality. It's who he is, and Earth doesn't answer to it. Because Earth is the element of standing your ground and meeting the thing head on. And you cannot fake that. You can't get to it by understanding it. The only route is through actually doing it. Once badly, with something coming at you. So all Toph's encouragement would have been noise. Every kind word would have been another opportunity to get out of it. The scaffolding would have held him up in exactly the place he needed to fall. What eventually works is not a lesson, it's a situation. Sokka's in trouble, Aang has to move a rock, or the thing is over, and he moves the rock. That's it. Nobody explained anything. He just found out in his body in a moment where avoidance had been removed as an option. And that's Toph's actual teaching method. Once you strip out the insults, she doesn't transmit knowledge. She arranges circumstances where you have no choice but to acquire it yourself. She puts you in front of the rock the way the badger moles put her in front of a hillside. And then she gets out of the way and lets the world do the teaching, because in her direct personal experience, the world is the only teacher that ever told her the truth. There's an old story from a Chinese text about a cook cutting up an ox, who's so good at it that his knife has never needed sharpening in 19 years because he doesn't hack through anything. He finds the spaces that are already there and moves in them. And when someone asks him how he does it, he says roughly that he stopped looking at it a long time ago and works by something else instead. That's the story people always reach for with skill, and it's usually reached for a bit reverently. What I like about it here is the practical bit. The cook can't teach that. He can describe it beautifully. Describing it has never once produced a second cook. Toph is that, minus the poetry and plus the mockery. Now the honest part, because I don't want to hand her a win she hasn't earned. Her method works on Aang, once, in a very particular situation, on a very particular problem, where the obstacle was avoidance and the remedy was having avoidance taken away. That's a real result. It's also one data point, and Toph does what people do with one data point that flattered them, which is she treats it as a philosophy. She's built a whole approach to other people out of a technique that worked on someone who happened to need exactly that and nothing else. And you can watch her run that same play on other people in other situations for decades. It works far less often than she thinks it does. It costs a lot more than she notices. We'll get to what it cost later, at the point where it's got names attached. But in fairness to her, and this is what makes her more than a stubborn kid, she does eventually notice something. Not here. Years later, running her own school, she catches herself doing something to her students that she recognises from the inside, and the recognition genuinely stops her. There's one more wrinkle in her teaching that I want to put down before we move on, because it's the thing that stops her being simply a hard-nosed traditionalist. Toph's method isn't harsh because she believes in harshness. It's harsh because she has no other setting. And you can see the difference in a detail the show slips in without comment. When she teaches Aang, she does actually compromise. A bit, not much. But she notices that shouting at him isn't working, and she adjusts quietly, without ever admitting that's what she's doing, because admitting it would be unbearable. That's her doing something genuinely difficult, and she does it while insulting him, which is how she does everything difficult. The other half of it is that her way of learning gave her something nobody else has, and took something away that she never noticed was gone. Her earthbending is unpredictable precisely because it never went through a school. She'll take on a whole squad of the world's most drilled earthbenders and beat them while simultaneously covering her friends, which shouldn't be possible. And it's possible because they're running a system and she isn't running anything at all. But, and here's the fair bit, the bit that keeps her human, both sides of that fight are leaning on a crutch. The Dai Li depend on their stone gloves. Toph depends on her feet. Neither of them can imagine being without the thing they've never been without. She'd tell you she's free of their rigidity, and she'd be right, and she'd be standing on the one assumption she can't examine while she said it. That's all of us, I suppose. You can't inspect the thing you're looking through. Anyway, she'd never call any of this changing her mind. Toph doesn't change her mind. Toph occasionally arrives with no comment at a different place, and if you point it out, she'll tell you that's where she was standing the whole time. Somebody wrote her a letter saying her father finally understood her. I want to start there, because everyone starts with the cage, and the cage is the famous bit, and the letter is the cruel bit, and it never gets its due. The situation, Toph has run away, she's with Aang and the others, There in a Fire Nation town, things are briefly going well, and a message arrives saying that her mother is in the city and that she's had time to think and that she understands now. Come and meet me. Consider what that is as a piece of work. Whoever wrote that had to know precisely which sentence Toph could not walk past. Not, your mother misses you. Not, come home. Understands. The one word she'd been waiting her entire life to hear from that house. And the only word that would get her to leave the building alone without telling anyone. It's a lie, obviously. Her mother didn't write it. What's waiting for her is Xin Fu, the man who ran the fighting arena, and Master Yu, the tutor who'd been paid to teach her breathing exercises, both hired by her father to fetch her back. They grab her and they put her in a box, a metal box on a cart pulled by an ostrich horse. And the reason it's metal is the entire point. Metal is the one thing an earthbender can't touch. Everybody knows that. It's not a strategy, it's a fact about the world, the way earthbenders can bend metal. You put an earthbender in a metal box and the box wins. That's why the box exists. So there she is, lied to using her mother's love as the bait, boxed in the only material that's ever been able to hold her, being carted home by her old teacher to a father who is about to reduce her freedom even further as a reward for having demonstrated competence. And she starts hitting the walls? Not out of rage, though I imagine there was plenty. She's doing the thing she's done her whole life. Push on the world, read what comes back. And what comes back faintly is not what should come back. Because metal is not a separate thing from earth. Metal is earth that's been dug up and refined. And refining is not magic. It's just a process. And no process is perfect. There are still bits of unpurified crude earth in there. Trace amounts, impurities, the stuff the smelting mist, and she can feel them. And if she can feel them, she can reach them. And if she can reach them, she can drag the entire wall along with them. She metal bends, first person in the history of the art. She gets out, folds the box shut with the two of them inside it, which is the correct response, and rides a wave of earth back to the city. Here's why I think this is the best single idea in the show. Nobody said metal bending was hard. Hard would have been a challenge. Hard is a thing you train for. What everybody said, for the entire recorded history of a discipline thousands of years old, practiced by millions of people, taught in academies with lineages and masters and traditions, is that metal is not earth. It's a different category. It's over there. That wasn't a rule anyone had to enforce. It was just a fact everybody had. And facts you already have are not things you go and test. And it was wrong. It had always been wrong. It was wrong the whole time, and the evidence was sitting in every cooking pot in the world. The reason nobody found it isn't that they weren't good enough. Some of those people were extraordinary. The reason nobody found it is that finding it required perceiving the trace impurities inside solid metal, and there was precisely one person alive whose entire way of knowing the world ran through exactly the sensitivity that would notice them. And she'd been raised to think she was fragile, and she'd never been in a metal box before, and she'd needed to be angry enough to hit it. That's a very specific set of coincidences. It's also, I'd argue, roughly how these things go. Impossible hardly ever means impossible. Most of the time it means nobody with the right instrument has ever been in the right room in the right mood. And what she discovers isn't even a new power. That's the elegant bit. She doesn't learn to do a new thing. She finds out that the boundary was fake, and that she'd been able to do it all along, and had simply never had a reason to reach through the line, because everyone agreed the line was there. I find that oddly moving, in a way I struggle to articulate it at a sensible hour. The most famous invention in the history of the Earth Kingdom is somebody noticing that a wall was never a wall. What she does with it afterwards is the part I want to spend the rest of this section on, because it's less well known and it's better than the discovery. She opens a school, not immediately, and not for the reason you'd guess. After the war, she starts noticing that her students tend to reveal their potential whenever they react emotionally, which she reads correctly as a signal those people might be able to metal bend based on their earth-bending sensitivity. So she goes and finds them, and she sets up the Beifong Metal Bending Academy, and her first 3 students are called Penga, the Dark One, and Ho Tun. They are not warriors. This is what I love. The first 3 metal benders in the history of the world, hand-picked by the inventor of the art, are a chatty girl with a crush, a lad who's committed to being sinister, and a nervous bloke who catastrophizes about everything. They are a shambles. They can't do it. Weeks go by. They cannot do it at all. And Toph does what Toph does. She puts them in front of the rock. She's hard on them. She's relentless. She pushes and pushes and pushes and gets nothing back. And eventually, she's talking to Sokka about it. And she says the thing out loud. She says, roughly, that she's been so fixed on becoming the world's first metal-bending teacher that she stopped seeing who her students actually are. She's been shoving them into the shape of her own ambition. She decided in advance what they were for, and then she hears it. She hears exactly whose voice that is. Because that's her father. That is precisely, exactly, to the letter, what Lao Beifong did to her. Decide in advance what a person is. Build them a curriculum that serves your idea of them. Never check. That is a genuinely hard thing for the show to do to its own best character, and it does it without a speech and without a swelling score. Toph, at 14 or so, catches herself running her father's program with the polarity reversed, and it stops her cold, and she decides to give up the academy rather than keep doing it. She'd rather have no school than be that. She doesn't get to, as it happens. Her students overhear the whole conversation, and what tips them over isn't her method and isn't her encouragement. It's finding out that she'd had a vision of them at all, and that she was about to walk away rather than force them into it. They metal bend, all 3. Because of that, that is not a lesson she taught them. It's a lesson she was overheard failing to teach them, which is possibly the most honest depiction of teaching I've ever seen in a cartoon. She keeps the school, it grows. Eventually, Penga and the Dark One and Ho Tun are good enough to run the beginner classes themselves. And Toph gets bored, because of course she does, and goes looking for an underground fight in a warehouse, like she's 12 again. Some things don't move, but she'd seen it. Once early at 12, she'd seen the exact mechanism that had been used on her, running in her own hands. You'd think that would be enough to inoculate a person. Hold that thought as well. We're accumulating a few of those. There's a night at the Western Air Temple that I think about more than any other scene she's in. Zuko has turned up. Zuko, who has chased them across the world, who betrayed them in Ba Sing Se, who has by any reasonable accounting earned everything he's about to get, walks into their camp and says he's changed and he wants to teach Aang firebending. And every single person there says no, except Toph. Katara says no, with real heat. Sokka says no. Aang says no. It's unanimous, it's completely understandable, and it's wrong. Toph says yes. Not because she's forgiving, she isn't especially, and not because she likes him. She barely knows him. She says yes because she can hear his heart, and his heart is telling the truth. That's it. That's the whole reason. The evidence is available to her and it isn't available to anyone else. And she reports it, and she gets outvoted. Then later that night, she goes to his camp alone to talk to him, because she's the one who believed him. And he panics and firebends on reflex and burns her feet. Her feet, the one part of her that everything runs through, and she can still see well enough to get home. Her whole method of moving through the world is soles on ground, and her soles are burned. So she spends the entire night walking back to the temple, by feel, on damaged feet, in the dark, having been hurt by the person she was the only one to stick up for. Nobody in the group learns about this in a way that produces an apology scene. The show doesn't stage a moment, She just gets back and gets on with it. Right, let's talk about the ability itself, because it's easy to file under handy plot device, and I think it's the most philosophically interesting thing about her after the metal. She can't detect lies. That's not what it is, and the distinction turns out to matter enormously. What she detects is a body, heartbeat, breath, the little tightening in the legs, the shift of weight, the physiological signature of someone saying something they don't believe, which is a very different thing from truth. It tells you what a person thinks, not what's the case. Somebody sincerely, confidently wrong reads to her as clean. Somebody nervous about telling you something true reads as a liar. There's a distinction philosophers make that's genuinely useful here. Between two separate virtues, people lump together as honesty. One is sincerity, saying what you actually believe. The other is accuracy, going to the trouble of making your beliefs correct in the first place. They're independent. You can be scrupulously sincere and completely wrong, and you can be very well informed and lie all day. Toph has a sincerity detector. Perfect, portable, permanent. She has no accuracy detector at all. Nobody does. And she treats the first as the second, more or less constantly, for her entire life. And I think you can trace some of her worst calls to exactly that. If a room feels sincere to her, she takes the room seriously. That works extremely well on Zuko, who is telling the truth about himself. It works considerably less well later on, in a city, on people whose whole thing is believing their own material. But leave the errors aside. What I actually want to sit with is the texture of it, what it's like to live like that. Every single person, all day, every day, is soaked in small untruths. That's not a criticism of anyone. It's how the species holds itself together. I'm fine. No, that's fine, honestly. It's lovely, thank you. Yeah, I'm nearly there, of course I remember. Almost none of that is malice. Nearly all of it is furniture. Soft edges we put on things, so that a room full of people can be in a room together for an hour. Toph gets none of it, not one. She's 12 years old, and she is standing in a group of people who love her, and she can hear the actual state of everyone in it, continuously, whether or not she wants to. She knows exactly how frightened Aang is under the confidence. She knows Sokka's jokes are load-bearing. She knows when Katara says she's fine and isn't. Every kindness anyone offers her arrives with its own subtitles. And there's no off switch. Sighted people close their eyes. She'd have to leave the ground. I don't think the show ever quite says out loud what that does to a person, but you can read it in the shape of her. Of course she's blunt. Blunt is the only register available to someone who can hear the machinery. Politeness is a duet, and she's the only one who can hear that her partner's out of tune, so she stops trying to sing. There's a lonelier layer under that, and then I'll leave it, because I don't want to make her tragic. She isn't, and she'd hate that. But it's there. Everybody else in that group gets to be spared things. That's what the social fictions are for. When something's too much, your friends soften it, and you get the softened version, and you can sit with the softened version for a bit until you're ready. That's a service we perform for each other. It's most of what love looks like on a Tuesday. Nobody can perform it for Toph. Not because they wouldn't. They'd love to. They try constantly. It's just that the service can't be delivered. She receives the unsoftened version of everything, from everyone, always, including the people softening it, including their reasons. She's the only person in the world who never gets a break from other people's insides. And I think the thing she does with that, the thing that's genuinely admirable, and also a bit of a shame, is that she decides very early to be proud of it. She turns it into a personality. She's the one who says the real thing. She's brutally honest. Everybody says so. It's her brand. She'll tell the Avatar he's rubbish. She'll tell Iroh what she thinks. She doesn't care who you are. And that's real. That's a genuine virtue, and the group is better for having her in it. It's also, I suspect, a person making a flag out of something she was never given a choice about. You can't be spared, so you decide sparing is for cowards. You can't do the duet, so you announce that the duet is dishonest. It's the same move as the arena, if you look at it. Take the thing that was done to you, put a costume on it, walk out and get applauded for it. She's not wrong to do it. Honestly, given the options, it's about the best thing available. And there's real value in a group having exactly one person in it who cannot be managed, cannot be handled, cannot be smoothed over, and who will simply say the thing at the table while everyone's still deciding how to phrase it. But I noticed that when she believed Zuko, she got outvoted, went to talk to him alone, got burned for it, and walked home all night on it without telling anyone. She had the truth. She said it. Nobody took it. And the cost of having been right landed on her feet. In the dark, on her own. An iron mine comes down and she gets underneath it. That's the image. Ceiling collapsing, rock and beams and everything above it coming down on a group of people. And a girl of about 15, with her arms up holding the entire thing in the air by force of will, while it gets heavier and heavier and heavier, and she does not put it down. And the reason she doesn't put it down is that her father is under there. Let me back up, because the road to that moment is one of the meanest things that ever happens to her. Years after the war, she's travelling with Aang and the others, and they come across an industrial refinery, earth and fire, a big new operation, smoke and machinery, and progress. And Aang doesn't like it, because Aang looks at it and sees a wound in the landscape. Toph does like it. Toph looks at it and sees Earth Kingdom and Fire Nation working together in a building, which is precisely the thing everybody nearly died for. And she's not going to get sentimental about a nice view. That's worth flagging on its own, actually, because people forget it. Toph is a modernist, genuinely. She's the one arguing for the factory. She thinks change is how anything gets better, and she has a fairly low tolerance for people mourning the way things used to be, which is not a mystery given what the way things used to be did to her. Then she finds out who co-owns the refinery, her father, and she goes to see him. Of course she does. 13 years old, hasn't spoken to him properly in about a year, and there's a door with his name on it, and she walks up to it. And Lao Beifong tells the guards to remove her from the premises. He does not say hello. He does not acknowledge that she's his daughter. He has her escorted out by hired muscle, and when she gets in anyway, and stands in front of him, and tells him what she's done, invented an entire art, taught the Avatar, helped end a 100-year war, founded a school, he doesn't react. Not with anger, not even with pride he's refusing to show. He simply denies any kinship with her and lets her list her achievements to a wall. She was right, in other words, about all of it. Everything she suspected as a child about how much her accomplishments would count for in that house turns out to have been an underestimate. And then the mine starts to go, and he's in it, and she holds it up. She holds it up for an unbearable length of time. The show is very clear about this. It isn't a heroic flourish. It's grinding, she's straining. It goes on, past the point where she should have failed, and it keeps not ending. Her students get there. Aang gets there. Between them, they get everybody out. And then Toph, having held a mountain off her father's head for longer than a person should be able to, collapses in his arms. I don't know what to do with that scene, honestly. I've never known what to do with it. It's not a reconciliation. There's no speech. He doesn't say the thing. She doesn't say the thing. There's just a man holding his unconscious daughter, who has just saved his life at enormous cost, after refusing to admit she was his daughter about 10 minutes earlier. The show doesn't resolve it. That's the part that sticks in me. It doesn't give you the scene where he weeps and apologizes and everything is understood. What it gives you instead is a line later about how her relationship with her father was slowly being mended. Slowly being mended. That's such an unglamorous phrase, and it's completely correct. That's how it actually goes. Nobody gets the speech. What people get, if they're lucky, is a long, low process where somebody starts turning up and somebody else stops flinching, and nothing is ever formally announced and one day you notice it's been better for a while. 3 months on, she's helping oversee work at that refinery, just there, working with them. No ceremony. I want to say something about the physical shape of that mind sequence because I think it's doing more than it lets on, and it's the reason this section exists at all. Toph's entire way of being in the world is push and read what comes back. That's the deal she made in the cave. She has spent her whole life pressing on things and finding out the truth from the response, and it's never let her down, because rock is honest. Rock has no motive. You lean on rock and rock tells you exactly what it is. And here she is doing that, with everything she's got, holding up several thousand tons of honest and reliable earth, in order to save a man who will not tell her the truth about who she is. The rock in that mine is doing exactly what rock does. The father is not. She can hold up the one, and she cannot do a single thing about the other. And the strength that makes her the most formidable person in the room is completely, comically useless against a man who simply declines to say a sentence. I don't think the show planned that as a metaphor. I think it just fell out of the situation, which is how the good ones usually arrive. There's a detail that makes it slightly worse or better, depending on your mood. When it's all over, and Aang wants to destroy the refinery, Toph argues against it. She stands there, bruised, having just been publicly disowned by the man who owns it, and defends the factory. Not because it's his, because she still thinks the argument holds. The refinery is still a symbol of two nations building something together, and her father being awful doesn't change the merits, and she is not going to let the fact that she's hurt make her wrong on purpose. That's a very particular kind of integrity, and it's rarer than it sounds. Most of us, when someone humiliates us, find that our opinions quietly reorganize themselves around wanting them to lose. Toph doesn't do that. The argument was good before he was cruel, and it's good after. She keeps them in separate boxes. Then she goes back to work, and 3 months later she's overseeing the place, and the whole thing just gets absorbed into the ongoing business of being alive. One last thing about that refinery, because it's the detail that tells you she wasn't being noble, she was being consistent. Toph had spent her whole childhood being told that the old ways were the good ways. Manners, lineage, propriety, the family name, the correct fork. Every restriction placed on her came wrapped in tradition. So when she looks at a smoking factory that two former enemies built together, she isn't seeing industry. She's seeing the first thing in her entire life that was made by people who didn't check what had always been done. She's for it because it's new. That's the whole argument. It's not a sophisticated position, and I don't think she'd claim it was. And there's something almost funny about her standing in the ruins of her own humiliation, making the case for progress to the Avatar, who's 112 years old in a boy's body and misses everything. Two people arguing about the future, while one of them is bleeding from the past and neither of them mentions it. She never gets the apology, as far as we ever see. She gets something duller and probably more useful. She gets a man slowly, over years, without ever making a statement about it, letting her exist. There's a metal statue of her above the front door of the Republic City Police headquarters. Full uniform, arms at her sides, looking, as much as a statue of Toph can look, extremely unimpressed with everyone coming through the door underneath her. She's in a niche above the entrance, which is a very specific piece of civic design. Not in a square, not on a plinth in a park where you can walk round her. Above the door, so that every officer who ever went to work in that building did it by passing beneath her, whether they thought about it or not. She built that force. First chief of police the city ever had, and she built it out of metal bending, which is to say she took the thing she'd worked out alone in a box, on the back of a cart while being kidnapped, and turned it into a profession with uniforms and a training program and a reputation the equal of anything in the Four Nations. Think about how odd that is for a second. The city's whole apparatus of law and order is founded on a technique invented by a runaway teenager in captivity as an escape. The tool she made to get out of a cage became the tool the city used to put people in them. I'm not sure anyone in that building ever noticed, and I'm quite sure Toph didn't. And there's something in that I find genuinely funny in a bleak sort of way. She was good at it. Properly good. Decades of it. And the thing I keep noticing about Chief Toph is little of the girl from the warehouse is gone. She's still calling Aang Twinkle Toes, in her 40s, in her office, in front of people, purely to annoy him. He's the avatar. He's a grown man with a family. Doesn't matter. She's mildly irritated that he wants to come along on an arrest, and she lets him anyway, and she uses the name. And then there's Yukone. Yukone was a bloodbender, running the city's underworld, and she went to arrest him, and she got him, and she brought him to trial, and he was found guilty. Done. Except that in the courtroom, in front of everyone, he blood-bent the room, took Sokka first, and when she moved to help her friend, he took her too, and made her use her own keys to unlock his handcuffs, and then threw her across the room. She was 40. She was, by that point, the single, most physically formidable person on the continent, and she was made to walk over and free the man she'd just arrested with her own hands, while she watched herself do it. That's the one time the ground can't help her. That's the deepest violation of the deal she made in the cave. Her whole life is, touch the world, get the truth, act on it. And here's a man who reaches inside the body, doing the touching, and drives it. The show does not dwell on this, and I've always thought it should have. It's a footnote in a flashback. But you cannot tell me that didn't leave a mark on a woman whose entire identity is that nobody moves her. Now, the daughters. Toph had two. Lin, whose father was a man called Kanto, and Suyin, 6 years later, with somebody else. She raised them both on her own, in a city, while running its police force. What she did next, she did deliberately, as policy. Her parents had held her so tightly that she couldn't breathe. So she did not do that. She gave her girls freedom. Room. No plan, no expectations, no cage. Find your own path. She'd worked out at 5 that being decided, in advance, is the worst thing you can do to a child. And she'd seen the mechanism again at 14, in her own hands, with her own students, and stopped herself. And so she made absolutely certain that whatever else she was, she would not be Lao Beifong. She wasn't. She got that right. She got that completely right. And I want that on the record before I say the rest. The rest is that the opposite of a cage is not a home. It's just a field. Lin became a police officer, and then chief after her, and became, and this is the thing that guts me, someone who could not stop working, could not stop achieving, could not stop being the daughter who did it properly. Suyin went the other way and became a rebel, running with a gang, doing crime for fun, which is, if you're keeping score, exactly what her mother did at 12, and Toph did not appear to enjoy the resemblance. And then, in 142 AG, Lin arrested her own sister, caught her fleeing a theft, brought her in. Both of them ended up in their mother's office, and Toph destroyed the report, tore it up, made it go away, then sent Suyin off to live with Lao and Poppy, with her parents, the ones who'd built the cage, and retired from the force shortly afterward. You can argue about that decision all night, and people have. She was protecting her daughter from prison. She was also protecting the city's chief of police from the scandal of having a criminal for a daughter, and she was also telling one daughter that her work counted for nothing, and she was also, without saying it, closing the file on the whole thing rather than sit in a room and have the conversation. And it took, at a rough count, about 12 years to detonate. Lin stopped speaking to her mother. Around 142 AG, they became estranged, and it lasted 12 years. 20, not a falling out, a fifth of a century of a mother and daughter in the same country not speaking. Here's what I think happened, and I want to say it carefully because it's the whole point of this section. Toph looked at her childhood and correctly identified that her parents held on too tight, so she let go. And what she never quite registered is that the problem in that house was never the grip. The problem was that nobody ever asked her anything. Her parents decided who she was, and then squeezed. Toph declined to decide who her daughters were, and then declined to ask either, and left and let them find out on their own, because that's what worked for her. She swung the pendulum with total conviction, and the pendulum went straight past the thing. She's not her father. She's a different failure, and she's a much better parent than he was, and both those things can be true. She gave them the one thing she'd needed most and never had, and she gave it to them instead of the other things, because she'd only ever had a theory about one deficiency, and the mechanism, the actual mechanism, deciding in advance and never checking, she'd already spotted once at 14 in a school in Udao, and stopped herself and put it down. She'd seen it. She had the tools. It didn't stick, none of which is a criticism, particularly. It's just what people are like. We fix the specific wound we can name, and we walk straight into the one next to it, because the light's better where we've already been looking. There's a whole video's worth of Lin Beifong in this, incidentally, and I'll probably make it, because she deserves more than a paragraph. And I've got things to say about a woman who became a police chief in order to have a conversation with her mother she never had. Anyway, Toph retired, and the statue went up, and the city loved her, and somewhere in there she stopped seeing one of her daughters at all, and then she left. Just left, packed nothing, told almost no one, went looking for enlightenment. Her friend Ai Wei's account is that after that she wasn't seen. I've always found that a very Toph way to handle an unresolved life. Don't fix it. Don't discuss it. Go and stand somewhere else and see if the ground there tells you anything. Mud then. Warm, wet, thick, full of roots, and the avatar face down in it. Korra has spent years being broken and half-mended, and has finally dragged herself somewhere she can't explain. Following an instinct she doesn't understand, and she passes out in a swamp. And an old woman finds her and carts her home and puts her down, and when Korra comes round, introduces herself as an old friend of her previous life. Toph is 86, white hair, still barefoot obviously, living in a hollowed-out tree in the middle of the foggy swamp on her own, and by every indication, having the time of her life. Now, remember the thing I asked you to hold ages ago? The other place she ran to as a child? The swamp near Galing that she'd sneak off to sometimes, when the house got unbearable? She went looking for enlightenment across the entire world for decades, and she ended up in the swamp. Not that exact swamp, as far as anyone can tell, but a cave, the specific kind of place that 5-year-old Toph, with no plan, and no theory, and nothing but a preference, used to run to when she needed to be somewhere that wasn't people. A lifetime of searching to arrive at the answer she'd had before she could read, which she couldn't have anyway. But you take my point. What she does with Korra is worth walking through, because it's her entire method, unchanged, wheeled out one last time on the person who needs it most. First she spars with her, and wins easily, and enjoys it far too much. Then she works out, before anyone else, before any healer, before Katara, that there's still metal in the girl. Residual mercury, left in her body from the poison that nearly killed her, sitting in there for years, quietly making her weak. And Toph can feel it, because of course she can. It's metal in earth, essentially. It's the impurity in the refined thing. It is the same perception that got her out of a box 70 years earlier, applied to a person, and she tries to pull it out. And Korra resists, tenses up, won't relax, fights her. So Toph stops, gets frustrated, and tells her she'll have to get it out herself. That's the rock again, decades on in a swamp, with the fate of the world attached, and Toph Beifong's answer is, I'm not doing it for you, do it yourself. No, I'm not explaining. The next bit, though, is something I don't think younger Toph would have managed. She sends Korra out to get mushrooms. That's the errand. Go and fetch some mushrooms. And it's a trick. She knows perfectly well the swamp will show Cora things, because the swamp does that. And Cora comes back rattled, having seen visions of every enemy who ever hurts her. And Toph doesn't tell her to toughen up. She says, the swamp wants you to see something. And then she explains, patiently, at length, that every one of those people had noble intentions. Every single one. They wanted something worth wanting. The problem wasn't that they were evil. The problem was that they were out of balance. That's not a young woman's line. That's not the person who beats up men in warehouses for the reveal. That's someone who has spent a very long time watching people, including herself, be right about something and wrong in the doing of it, and has concluded that the interesting failure mode isn't villainy. It's proportion. And then, when Cora still won't face it, Toph gets fed up and does the last thing. She takes her to a tree, a banyan grove tree, enormous, ancient, sitting at the heart of the swamp, and she explains that the roots of it are connected to the entire swamp. Every tree in that place is that tree. It's all one organism, and everything that happens in it happens in something that is, in a sense, listening, and that is how Toph, at the end of it, sees the world. I want to stop here for a moment because this is the thing I've been circling all night. The woman who ran the swamp's roots through her seismic sense could perceive Zaofu. She could perceive Republic City. She could sit in a tree in the middle of a marsh with her feet on wet ground and know what was happening to her family hundreds of miles away, because the swamp is connected to everything, and she'd learned to read it. That's how she found out Suyin had been captured, by the way. Not a messenger, not a letter. She felt it through the vines. Now hold that next to the 12-year-old. 12-year-old Toph's entire creed is, I trust what I can feel through my own 2 feet, and nothing else, and nobody else, and anything that isn't touching my ground doesn't exist. That's not a preference, that's the whole architecture. That's why she can't sense someone in the air, and why she nearly drowns in water, but not why she got in a fight with everyone who ever tried to help her, nor why she gave her daughters a field instead of a home. Self-reliance, direct contact, no intermediaries. It made her the greatest earthbender in history, and it cost her Lin. And here she is at the end, perceiving the world through a network she didn't build and doesn't control, feeling her granddaughter's city through a root system, entirely dependent on a connection between things she has no hand in and cannot verify and simply has to trust. She would never, ever call that a change of mind. She'd tell you it's the same thing. Feet, ground, vibration, information, same as it ever was, only the ground got bigger. And she'd be technically correct, which is the most Toph way to be correct. But it isn't the same. The whole point of the original deal was that the ground was hers, and short and immediate and answerable. The swamp isn't that. The swamp is a thing she's part of. She's not standing on it and pushing. She's in it, and it's in her, and the information comes through things she's connected to, rather than things she is hitting. A lifetime of the most stubborn self-reliance anybody's ever managed, and it terminates in a woman sitting inside a giant organism, knowing things because she's connected to them. She'd hate me for that paragraph. Genuinely, she'd tell me I've gone soft and to hit a rock. The rest of it briefly, because it's honest and it belongs here. She's cynical now. She'd worked out, somewhere in all those decades of policing, that no matter how hard you fight it, crime and injustice never give up. Ever. You don't win. You just keep the number down for a while, and then you die, and someone else keeps it down. She says it flatly. It isn't despair, it's an actuarial observation from someone who did the job for 30-odd years, and it's part of why she left. She does go back. Once, feels the trouble through the vines, walks out of the swamp, helps rescue Suyin's family. And on that trip, sitting round a fire, she talks about Lin's father for the first time in Lin's entire life. The first time. Lin is in her 50s. It goes badly at first, as you'd expect. And then at the end, in a bamboo forest, saying goodbye, Toph apologises. Actually apologises for the problems in both her daughter's upbringing. Not a grand speech, not a scene, Just an old woman saying she knew she hadn't been the best at it, and that she was proud of the women they'd turned into, and then declines to come back to Republic City. Her fighting days are not over. It's the next generation's turn. There's a coda, and it's very funny. A few months later, Cora turns up and asks her to leave Jailing, the town that didn't know she existed, and return to Republic City. She says no. They don't talk her into it. She runs. She doesn't run, so there's no rigged election for her to lose. And when Cora asks her to return to Republic City, she says no and gives her reason, which is that she's going back to the swamp. That's her last word on public life. She has done more for that country than almost anybody living, and her considered summary is that she'd rather deal with something that's straightforwardly trying to eat her. She goes back to the swamp. She visits her granddaughter sometimes. She and Katara start a prank war on a beach at 86, which is exactly right, and which I refuse to elaborate on because it's perfect as it is. And that's roughly where we leave her, in a tree, feet on wet ground, connected to everything and not discussing it. I skipped an evening, and I did it on purpose because it belongs here rather than back there with the arena. Very early on, days after she joins them practically, Toph has a row with Katara and walks out. The row is about washing up nominally. It's not about washing up. Katara asks her to help with the chores. Toph says she carries her own weight. Katara points out that carrying your own weight and being part of a group are different jobs. And Toph does what Toph does when a conversation gets close to something, which is escalate it until she can leave. And she leaves, storms off into the night on her own, which for her is not remotely daunting, and ends up sitting under a tree in the dark. And an old man turns up with tea. Iroh, obviously. On the run, exiled, wanted, carrying his own quiet catastrophe around. And he sits down next to a furious blind 12-year-old he has never met and offers her a cup. And she, and this is the bit that gets me, she lets him. She doesn't threaten him. She doesn't tell him to clear off. Something about him reads clean, and she just sits there. And they talk, not about her at first, about his son, which is not a thing he's obliged to bring up, and which he brings up anyway. And then she tells him what's actually wrong, which is not the washing up. What's wrong is that she thinks they pity her, that every offer of help is a comment on her eyes. That the reason Katara wants her to be part of the group is that Katara thinks she needs looking after, and Toph has spent her entire life having people look after her, and she has watched, from the inside, what looking after does to a person, and she would rather be alone forever than be somebody's project again. Put like that, it isn't unreasonable. It's not even close to unreasonable. It's a completely rational conclusion drawn from 12 years of consistent, high-quality evidence. It's also wrong. That's the point of the scene. And what Iroh says to her, more or less, is that they're not helping her because she's blind. They're helping her because they're her friends, and that's what friends do to each other, in all directions, all the time. It isn't a service rendered to the weak. It's the actual content of the thing. He doesn't argue her out of her position. He just points out that she's misfiled it. I love this scene for a reason that took me years to work out. Toph can tell when people are lying. She's had that her whole life. And what that means is that she has never once had to wonder about anybody's sincerity. She just knows. So she's built her entire model of other people out of sincerity readings. And the readings are always accurate, and she has therefore concluded that she's extremely good at understanding people. She isn't. She's extremely good at one specific measurement. And the thing she got wrong about Katara was never a matter of sincerity at all. Katara wasn't lying. Katara meant every word. Toph's readings on her would have been clean as a whistle every single time. Toph got the meaning wrong. Not the truth value. The meaning. She heard a sincere offer of help and slotted it into the only file she had for sincere offers of help, which was the one labelled The House. And the file was wrong. and no amount of hearing heartbeats was ever going to tell her that. The most sophisticated perceptual apparatus in the world, and she needed an old man with a teapot to explain what a friend is. That's not a failure of hers particularly. That's just what perception is. It gives you data. It doesn't give you what the data is for. She could hear every heart in that camp, and she couldn't hear what any of them were about. And there is no ability, in that world or this one, that does that job for you. You have to be told, or you have to be lucky, or somebody has to sit down next to you in the dark with tea. There's a detail in that scene that I only clocked on about the fourth watch, and it's the reason I've put it this late in the night rather than early. Iroh doesn't help her. He doesn't carry anything for her. He doesn't guide her anywhere. He doesn't lower his voice or slow down, or leave a hand hovering near her elbow in case. He talks to her the way he'd talk to anyone. Badly timed proverbs, tea, a story about his own worst thing, and he lets her sit there being furious for as long as she needs to be furious. He's the first adult in her life who treats her like a person rather than a situation, and he manages it in about 10 minutes on a hillside while being hunted. That's why it lands. She spent her whole life around people who help, and every single instance of help has arrived with a little tag on it saying, because you can't. And then somebody turns up who doesn't help at all, who just sits down, and it turns out that's the thing she'd been trying to get somebody to do since she was 5. The badger moles did it by not having eyes. Iroh does it on purpose, which is harder and rarer and, I think, the more impressive achievement of the two. And it means the argument he makes actually gets through, because he's demonstrated it before he says it. He's not telling her that help isn't pity while patronising her. He's telling her that help isn't pity, having just spent 10 minutes not patronising her. The evidence is in the room. And Toph, of all people, is the one person alive who can check the evidence. She goes back, incidentally. That's how it ends. She has the conversation, and then she turns round and rejoins them in a town called Tuzin, and nothing is announced about it. And she's just there again. And it holds, that's the thing. For the rest of her life, it holds. Whatever it is she got out of that conversation, it stayed got. While we're here, because it belongs to the same general territory, and I've not mentioned it, and it deserves a moment, she had a crush on Sokka. She dealt with it in the healthiest way imaginable, by insulting him more than she insulted anyone else on Earth. Nothing came of it. She is, as far as I can tell, the only member of that group who ends the whole thing without a romance attached. Everyone else pairs off. Toph doesn't. The show never treats that as a lack, and I appreciate that enormously. She's 12, and then she's 14, and she's busy, and there's no rule that says the story owes her a partner. There's a moment much later, near the end, where the group is together and somebody raises the idea that friendships might last more than one lifetime, that they might find each other again, and Toph, who does not do this sort of thing, who has a policy about this sort of thing, holds Aang's hand. That's it. That's the whole moment. The girl who left because she thought they pitied her, sitting there hand in hand, on the strength of a suggestion that she might get to keep them. She'd have denied it later. She'd have said it never happened, or that she was reaching for something, or she'd have changed the subject with an insult. But it happened. And it happened because an old man on the run, who had every reason to keep walking, sat down and gave a furious child a cup of tea and told her that the people trying to be kind to her were not, in fact, the same people as the ones who'd shut her in a house. If you're still awake down there, good. If you're not, also good. That was rather the arrangement. I've been trying to work out what I'd say if somebody asked me to sum her up in a sentence, and I keep failing, which I think is the correct outcome. The characters you can sum up in a sentence tend not to be worth the evening. But here's the nearest I've got. Toph was right. That's the strange thing about her. She was right about her parents, and right about the arena, and right about Zuko, and right about the rock, and right about the metal, and right about the refinery being worth defending, even by a man who wouldn't claim her. She was right about being able to do it herself, right about needing the ground under her feet, right that the world will tell you the truth if you're willing to put your hands on it. She was right about nearly all of it, for about 60 years, and being right did not save her from anything. She still lost 20 years with a daughter. She still needed a group of kids to explain friendship. She still ended up in a swamp, connected to everything, in a way her entire philosophy said was impossible. I don't think that's a tragedy, and I don't want to leave it sounding like one. If she heard me framing it that way, she'd tell me to go and hit something. It's just the ordinary shape of a life, done at scale by somebody with unusual equipment. You work out the thing that saves you. It saves you. And then you spend the rest of your life finding out where the edges of it are. And the edges always have people standing on them. She never gave a speech about any of it. She never sat anybody down and explained her position. She'd have found the idea of a video like this ridiculous, and she'd have found the idea of falling asleep to it slightly insulting, and she'd have been asleep herself about 11 minutes in, on a rock, no blanket, perfectly comfortable. Lynn's gonna get her own night out of me at some point. I've got far too much to say about a woman who spent a career becoming her mother in order to have an argument with her. That's for another time though. Tonight was Toph, born in a house that hid her. Taught by animals who never once noticed she was blind. Champion of a warehouse under a false name. The girl who found out a wall wasn't a wall, in a box, on a cart, on the worst day of her life. Chief of police, bad at apologies, better at holding up minds. Extremely good, apparently, at prank wars on beaches, well into her 80s, and at the very end of it, in a tree, in the mud, feeling a city she'd left through the roots of something enormous, and not making a single remark about it. I like her. I liked her when I was small for all the obvious reasons, and I like her now for none of them. Sleep well.